So there's so many questions that I want to ask you. Like, your career is extensive, and as you sort of said just before we hit record, you're a true portfolio man. But what I'd like to sort of dig into is some of the work you've done with, you know, some of the biggest brands on the planet, really. Can you give us a sort of whistle-stop tour through your background, because I know it's long, so we haven't got all day, but just kind of a little bit of a quick whistle stop through the big highlights and into what you're doing now with a little bit with Nobody Studio. So we'll touch a bit more on that later. But
yeah, so I studied computer programming in university and had a chance to go and work in San Francisco just in '99 at the height of the sort of .com boom. And I got a job working with a company called citysearch.com. And they were one of the first companies to be born out of a company called Idea Lab, which was the first ever venture studio created by Bill Gross. Now, at the time, what we did at City Search is you would pay us like $50 and we would go around to your cafe or your store and we'd take some photos and we would put you on a thing called the internet. So you could have like, you know, danstore.citysearch.com and you had a website. You know, so this was sort of essentially disrupting the yellow pages, if you will, at the time. But it was a fascinating experience for me because I got to sort of feel, if you will, like the real lightning moment of entrepreneurship, building something from the ground up, new technologies emerging and people figuring out how to use them. And we were in this sort of classic sort of abandoned warehouse down in the sort of South Soma, or the South District of San Francisco. You know, it wasn't very nice down there. It was cold. It was murky. The desks were made out of like makeshift TV, you know, like whatever we could find. But it was fascinating, you know. And our number one competitor that we were actually going to merge to was a company called Zip2. Have you ever come across them?
Is that Elon Musk's first venture?
It is, yeah. It's the first company he started with his brother, right? So we were basically in this sort of mix of you know, building companies with them. We ended up not merging, and City Search went on to be bought by Ticketmaster, and Elon sold his company Zip2, which actually gave him the money to sort of start working on X or PayPal. But you know, it gave me this whole sort of experience, if you will, of what it was about to be involved in early stage businesses. And then after that, I finished university and went back and started a mobile games development company. And this was just at the time, again, where mobile phones were starting to get connected to one another and they could talk. And then we built a game that was similar to sort of Tamagotchi, where you would keep a pet alive. And it just exploded. Like, people just went crazy for it. And it got me my first experience of getting funded by like a venture or an angel group. And we had suddenly Sony and Sega and Disney ringing us up about how to build these mobile games on phones. And it was just sort of a crazy experience in time. And I was 21 at the time and didn't really know anything about building businesses, but we had a lot of fun for 2 years, just like creating. I built like the game for Disney for Lilo and Stitch, the movie that came out. And
that's cool.
It was mad, you know, but we had no idea what we were doing. And I sort of blew up that company eventually, and I ended up taking 6 months off and backpacking around South America.
Well, that's just to stop you there. That the experience of getting investment, or like being, you know, having a successfully, you know, or a successful idea, or an idea that had like proper validation and was being sought after, and then not making it succeed. That's probably one of the best learning experiences you could have, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. It just, you know, like at the time, you know, we were sort of 4 folks in this tiny little prefab outside of Edinburgh, you know, freezing our asses off out there. Actually, Rockstar Games, who created Grand Theft Auto, were in the cubicle next door to us. It's kind of funny. But there was like, you know, this great feeling of, you know, excitement, I suppose, that we had created something that had got virality that, you know, you couldn't even have dreamed of, you know. And there was like hundreds of thousands of people like playing this game, and we had network providers like Orange and all these sort of folks contacting us because they hadn't had any experience of people suddenly downloading these mobile games on phones. And they were also trying to like figure out like, what does this technology mean? How are people using it? So it was exciting in terms of just new technology breakthroughs, trying to figure out customer behavior, and then at the same time create a repeatable business model for what we were doing. And those are sort of a lot of hefty components of a business, as well as just executing and growing and building your team. And we were still, as I said, sort of maybe the CEO was like 23 at best, and we just made a lot of mistakes, and it was great. It really was. It was, as you say, is a massive formative experience for me, because I had to learn real time how to program things, how to build a team, how to manage. If you can imagine, like Disney trying to deal with their lawyers about like working through procurement process for building mobile apps for them, like it was just crazy stuff. And and we generally just didn't know what we were doing, but like a lot of things, and this is probably one of my lessons, especially about being a creator. The only way you can learn these things is by doing them. A book can't teach you all this stuff. You have to roll up your sleeves and give things a try, and you're not going to be good at everything at your first shot. And some things we did really well that helped us go faster, and a lot of things we made some very naive mistakes that were just sort of blind spots for us. But the result was we still were able to grow like a successful agency, if you will. But it just wasn't something that we could scale to like tens, maybe even 1,000 people. It just wasn't a skill for us. We were just all getting burnt out, So it was sort of a learning experience for me in like some of the components about being an entrepreneur and creating something. And in many ways, I went to South America for 6 months because I needed to decompress. My head was just full, and that was a great 6 months to just sort of get away and reflect, and wrote down a lot of lessons learned and how would I do things differently. And, all of those things have helped me in the next sort of iterations of things that I've done.
So after traveling, you came back. What was next on the agenda for you?
Yeah, well, I basically decided I was traveling around the world. So after 6 months in South America, I ended up going to Australia. And I just went there for the Rugby World Cup in 2003. So I was just going to hang out for that and sort of make my way back to sort of Ireland, where I grew up, and figure out what I was going to do next. But I really sort of fell in love with Australia as a country and a lifestyle. And I came across this initiative where all the countries in Southeast Asia had pulled together $800 million to build next generation e-learning content that they were going to distribute across all of sort of Asia Pacific. So China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, all these countries like poured money into this fund. So I ended up working on that because of my background in gaming and gamification. Like learning is very like that. So people who might be familiar with Duolingo or ever used it, Duolingo is basically a game, right? You're learning. You have to complete harder and harder tasks, and you sort of, learn to say hello, you learn to say goodbye, you learn to say, can I go to the shop and order? So you're sort of leveling up skills all the time, and that's essentially what happens in a game. So I was helping to program all of this type of stuff, and it was just a fascinating project, working with all these different international groups, and I just loved the lifestyle down there. But again, it was one of these things that probably gave me much more insight into how do you reach global audiences? What are sort of unique about a customer in Japan versus China versus Australia or New Zealand or Singapore? But I just got to meet all these various different people who were sort of distributing and consuming our content, and it was just a lot of fun, and did it for 5 years and then moved to London. And that's really where I think I got probably very focused on learning things like agile software development, building products at ThoughtWorks. And
I was going to ask you about ThoughtWorks, because I've spent some time working at consultancies and product development and sort of lean agile worlds, and it sort of blew my mind a little bit, coming from a very project waterfall sort of linear model. So like what was What happened for you at ThoughtWorks, and how much do you reckon that what you kind of experienced there has sort of informed your philosophy now and how you approach business and what you're doing at Nobody Studios?
Yeah, well, basically, I think if I think of one experience that it was almost like a vertical growth curve, I
Yeah.
would say ThoughtWorks sort of provided that for me. You know, I was when I was living in Australia, Martin Fowler, who's one of the sort of, I don't know, you could call him like the godfathers of the agile movement, did a talk in Melbourne, and you know, he had just said he had just joined this company called ThoughtWorks. So I always had learned about the company and this agile manifesto that 10 people sort of wrote. And in essence, like 3 of those people worked at ThoughtWorks. And it was one of these companies where I was always like, well, look, if I'm ever in a place where they had a presence, I think I'm going to try work there. So when I moved to London, I applied and, you know, went through the process and got a job there, and I was delighted. And on my first day, you know, I walked into the offices, was like so unique as an experience. There was only like, you know, tables. There was no like cubicles. There was, you know, there was no like desks. It was just like open tables. And I didn't even know where to sit. And I just sat down at, you know, sort of one of the 3 tables in the middle. And sitting around me was like people like Jim Weber, who was a pioneer of actually writing APIs and web services. And another one was Jez Humble, who had just written this book called Continuous Delivery, which was sort of a seminal book around rapid iteration software releases. And, you know, I to be honest, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was like, and, you know, it was very engineering heavy culture at the time. And I still remember Jim Weber going to me, so what do you do? And I'm like, he goes, well, I'm like, well, I sort of like help like designing products. And he was like, products? There's all engineers here. Like, how are you going to manage me on an assignment? You know? And I was just started laughing. And you know, most of the people hadn't even thought about things like prototyping, customer testing, you know, and that's where I had learned a lot through both the startups I had been in. So in that company that had a strong engineering culture, you know, I just started doing those things. I started working on teams and showing people how to do customer development, how to do prototypes, how to get customer interviews and feedback into your product as you were building it. And these engineers were suddenly like going like, holy crap, you know, I thought I was building this great engineered content, but no one's using it correctly. And, you know, that's actually when Jez Humble, who had already written Continuous Delivery, reached back out to me and was like, I'm writing a new book. Eric Ries had just released The Lean Startup, which was a seminal book at the time. And he was like, I want you to write some chapters in our book called Lean Enterprise about building products. And, you know, myself, him, and Joanne Molesky, who ran all of our governance, risk, and security, wrote that book, and it just went gangbusters too as well. And yeah, I was flying all over the world, meeting executives in Fortune 500s, from American Airlines to, you know, McDonald's to Spotify to, it was just crazy, you know, all these people who were working on scaling these startups, or they were enterprises looking to get a bit of entrepreneurial spirit back in them.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing experience. And yeah, you know, I just sort of struck a vein at the right time, and, you know, it was a lot of fun.
That seems to be a thread through your journey as well, from being at the start of the .com, the start of the kind of mobile gaming thing. It seems to be, was that, or is that something that you sort of have, like an innate thing that you seem to zero in on what is the next thing? Like, is that in your mind what's happened, or is it more fortune based, do you think, just
Yeah, well,
in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, there's always a little bit of luck, and then there's a little bit of direction, right? I think there's there's a sort of loads of great quotes. Like Michael Jordan would say, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." You know, other people would say, you know, timing is a sort of luck and fluke at times, but you have to be in the position to catch the wave at the right time, you know. And so I've always been very interested in things that are new, that have never been done before. I sort of like, that's what I gravitate constantly towards. So the internet was new. mobile apps and mobile gaming was new. Agile software development was this sort of method to like get out of these big legacy projects. And then really after that, I've always looked for companies that are sort of on the edge of innovation or pushing the boundaries of that. And I just either gravitate them to businesses I want to work with, I advise, or I try to start. And that's really what led me to Nobody Studios. I'd been lucky enough to be involved in a number of startups that had done well. Some of them had been bought by companies like Atlassian. And I wanted to sort of find a way that I could put my energy and experience into multiple businesses in parallel. And one of the guys I worked with, Lee DeGally, he built the iStore for Apple, and he introduced me to Mark McNally, who's like our chief Nobody Studio. And Mark sort of described this notion of a venture studio to me, where you would bring together great entrepreneurs with expertise, and they would help early stage businesses sort of get to their potential really, really quickly, and by investing time, money, influence, and capital to get there. And it was just like the perfect place for me, really, to sort of bring all those skills to bear. And we started Nobody Studios a little over 3 years ago, and I think now I think studios are growing at somewhere like a rate of 500% year over year now, and it's also becoming an emergent asset class in itself. And
yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because obviously, for clarity to the audience, like thought former and the kind of project behind the creator and the team behind that are actually I just how to describe it, a company that is under this kind of Nobody Studios umbrella, I guess, and in your sort of tutelage, and it's not an incubator, but we are profiting from working with you in many ways. Why do you feel that that you're growing at such a rate? What do you think it is about sort of today's market that has sort of put you in that kind of position where everybody is sort of leaning into that?
Yeah, one of the fascinating things about it is I think everybody wants to build and create and see their ideas in the world now, right? I think especially in younger generations, it's almost like if you don't have a side hustle, it's kind of odd. Like I was back in Ireland recently in a coffee shop with the head barista, and he was explaining to me that, I love being a barista, I'm making this, but my side hustle is actually that I grow very specific fruit and veg that I like to sell to like high-end Michelin restaurants. And he was growing like everything from these like organic chives and tomatoes and stuff. And it was just fascinating to me. And I was like, and he's no intention of like scaling that business, right? It's like a small batch, high quality product that he's creating specifically for Michelin restaurants in the area that he lives. And he's like, just gives me a couple of $100, a month. It basically pays for my rent or my mortgage.
Yeah.
And it was just fascinating to me, that like this is the way people think about anything now, so and then the studio is really a place where if you have ideas but it's very hard to build things on your own, you can sort of be in a studio and have really experienced entrepreneurs who understand sales, marketing, team building, software development, operations, legal, compliance. You have all of these sort of support capabilities built around you. So the entrepreneurs can just focus on building the best business that they can, and they have all this inherent support around them to help them go faster and scale quicker. And I think that's one of the big value propositions that we offer at Nobody Studios.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're definitely profiting from that expertise. And I know that Gareth and Jason, the founders, are certainly appreciative and lean on those things, and we wouldn't be where we were without that support. So what's the big ambition at Nobody Studios? I've seen that 100 companies in 5 years to sort of into being funded elsewhere or being profitable. But what do you see as the you're saying you're growing at sort of 500%. Like, what does the studio look like itself in a few years' time?
Yeah, well, already we have investors in 55 different countries around the world. We've got teams in 17 that they're working actively. The vision is to have a studio and presence on every continent on the planet. We're a globally we call ourselves irrationally global about how we operate. So I live in the Philippines. Our chief nobody, Mark, is in Los Angeles. Our CFO is in Dallas. We have people in New York. We have people in London, Lisbon, Italy, Israel, like you name it, Australia. Like just so many people all over the world sort of working on getting this off the ground. And so what I imagine is we will continue to do that. We'll build businesses that might be launched here in the Philippines and stay here in the Philippines, right through to a lot of the organizations we have that are based in the US and scaling across the country there. So it's sort of fascinating experience. And our CEO or Mark McNally, or Chief Nobody, often says success is when we build a company in a country he's never been to with an idea he doesn't agree with somebody that he's never met, and then we help them build, launch, and scale that product and even exit it. And that's the way we think about trying to enable creators or entrepreneurs anywhere across the world. And I think that's a big vision for us, and we're excited to see it start to come to fruition.
Yeah, I like that idea of building something or building with people that you've never met in a country you've never been to. All of that stuff, I think, is such an interesting time, like, to be alive, that we can do that. Like, me personally, like, talking about side hustles, like, obviously I work for Thoughtformer and I do this, but I have my own sort of consultancy, and I work with, just finished a big project with a chap who runs a web and design agency out of Texas that, I've never met him, but we've just finished a 6-month project together, having met on LinkedIn of all places. So all of that sort of access to and the ability to be global. I mean, everybody's global now because of the internet, and like, just the potential is massive. I just wanted to change direction slightly and move on to a kind of big creative project that your last book, Unlearn, was a few years ago now, but in terms of production now, obviously with proliferation of Gen AI and just AI tools in general, like, I wonder if you could sort of talk about your creative process behind Unlearn. Like, what was the kind of big idea? What did you want to tell the world? And then sort of how did you embark upon, like, what probably now today is not such a daunting task, just in terms of accelerating some of the painstaking research and what have you. But I wonder if you could just share some of those stories with us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like writing a book, I think, is one of these things that's on many people's like bucket lists, and it was certainly on mine. And I was lucky, obviously, to be in the team when I wrote Lean Enterprise with Jez and Joanne. But I did have another sort of ambition to say, well, could I write one on my own? It felt like that was like the next sort of iteration of and growth challenge. So yeah, the Unlearn really came from the idea of, as I was traveling around with Lean Enterprise, I kept meeting all these amazingly talented executives and business leaders. And I found that teaching them new things was never a problem. Like, they were really good at picking up new skills and ideas and running with them. But the biggest limiting factor was them letting go of their existing behavior and thinking. So skills that had made them successful to date, but were probably limiting them going forward. So I kept hearing people talking about, oh, we need to learn. But the aha for me was like, no, these people need to unlearn some of the behavior that made them successful. And, a classic example is maybe when you're like a contributor on a team, the skills that make you successful as a contributor, like getting your jobs done, getting all your tasks completed, and finishing on time, on budget, they're great when you're a contributor. But then you often get promoted to a manager, and suddenly all those skills that made you successful as a contributor basically don't work as a manager. Like, you can't do everyone else's work. You can't just try to tell everybody how to do it the way you would do it. It sort of breaks down, you know. And this is sort of very much like what happens as you make these transitions in your life, especially in your career. So I was with all these execs and helping them sort of understand that was the big aha with Unlearn, is that it's really creating a system to help them iterate and experiment with new behaviors and thinking and apply them. And that was really the sort of motivation behind the book. And yeah, it's been a pretty provocative word. And, you know, I've had everybody from Serena Williams right through to, you know, business leaders in Fortune 10s reading this book and reaching out to me and asking, like, how can we apply this system together? And it's been
really amazing.
It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Like when you talk about that, because you've sort of gone through that process of like shifting, of working through a whole host of different business models and scale ups, and then working at ThoughtWorks and being exposed to large enterprises trying to completely change what they're doing. And then there's that dual thing of like people get good at their jobs, they get promoted into management, and not everybody is set out to be a manager.
No.
There are some people who are just really shit hot at doing what they do, and they should probably be left that way, but perhaps just become that, you know, become the principal, become the whatever that is in their chosen field. So it feels like a sort of perfect, a sort of a natural sort of segue for you to be talking to people about this. So you've got the idea, you've got the concept, you know what you want to say. So what resources and tools did you lean on the heaviest to kind of get it over the line? And what was the hardest part about writing it?
Yeah, well, first of all, like I'm dyslexic, so writing is extremely hard. I have a full history of D minuses in English literature in high school or grown up.
So you chose to write. So you chose to write a book or two books.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's kind of funny. I often say if my teacher from sort of secondary school knew that I'd written 2 books, they'd probably be in shock. They wouldn't believe it, you know. And the truth is, yeah, like writing a book is extremely hard, you know. And for me, I thought to be a writer, you know, you sort of had to follow Hemingway, you know, and you'd be in this purple sort of velvet jacket, sitting by a roaring fire, like supping on a fine cognac or wine, and then just writing 1,000 words. And listen, I tried. Yeah, exactly. You know, that's what I thought writers did, you know, but that didn't work for me. You know, I really struggled to get any words out, or even these methods like 100 words a morning or 1,000 words a day, or, you know, like none of that was really working for me. So I was sort of stuck. But the thing that really was a big help for me is I had to reframe the problem a little bit. You know, I was too narrow by thinking, well, creating a book means you have to type it all. But actually creating a book is about creating content. And there's lots of different ways to create content. Like writing is just one of them. And then I thought about like, what's the best way for me to create content, and which is actually talking. It's not typing. So what I ended up doing is I hired a journalist to interview me, and I mapped out all the different chapters in the book with bullet points and examples of what I wanted to cover in each chapter. And what we would do is we would do a sort of virtual call like this.
Yeah.
We would record it, and then I would send it to an AI to transcribe it almost instantly. And then the journalist would sort of take the transcription and sort of copy edit it and send me back an MVP of a raw draft of a chapter. And then from there, I would be able to iterate it really fast. So it was more, the blockage was actually creating the first sort of bad draft. And once I had that, then it was just an improvement process and going, oh, I forgot this story and I need to move that here. So we were in these rapid iteration cycles. And you know, that was using AI essentially to create these transcripts very quickly. And then the human touch was the copy editing and the creative like sequencing. And and then suddenly, you know, we had this book. And you know, as someone who, you know, really struggled to type, I suddenly had like, you know, 50,000 words written and ready to go to the publisher. And So I had to actually unlearn even how I
Yeah.
wrote a book, is to talk a book and use AI and copy editing and a journalist to work with me to do that. And it was a super project. And yeah,
Yeah.
the book was launched, and it's done really well.
That's the beauty of AI, and as a content creator and as a writer myself, I get asked often about, do I fear that AI will take my job? And I always sort of think like, no, because it just adds a level of speed and helps sort of automate and accelerate a lot of workflows, and like you said, actually like clear what is a pretty big roadblock for you. It's a pretty smart idea as well to deploy a journalist to kind of run an interview and record it, as opposed to perhaps just try and talking it through yourself.
Yeah, it was great, because they would sort of ask me questions just like you are in the show. It's like, tell me more about that, or why did you do it this way, or what made it hard? So then the stories that would come, I was able to sort of create a richness, if you will, of context to a story that is hard to create when you're just verbatim sharing it, right? With the joy of a dialogue is sort of somebody pulls out the sort of, well, tell me a little bit more about that thing, or tell me a little bit more about this thing. And it was a super process. And the person who helped me was, we became very good friends. We got to know each other very well. And, I look forward to, if I'm crazy enough to write another book in the future, working with them again on it. And
Do you think you will?
special. Oh, look, the fun thing about Nobody Studios is, I think the way we're even building this company is truly unique. Like we gave people the chance very early stage to invest in it. You didn't have to be a retail investor. You could be accredited investor. You could be a retail investor. That means anyone with bus drivers, cooks, all these people who typically don't get a chance to invest in early stage companies had a chance to own a piece of Nobody Studios for as little as $100. And when we ran our equity crowdfunding campaign, we had like 1,000 investors in 55 countries, and about 50% of them put in $100. So for me, it's sort of amazing now that these people own a part of the studio, and as the studio continues to grow and hopefully increase and generate returns for those folks, is going to be pretty special. At some point in the future, like sending checks back to all these people that invested in us in the earliest days. And, that's going to be a special moment when we get there.
So how did you, just actually on that, how did you go about doing that in terms of securing investment, finding retail investors? Like what were the sort of mechanisms, channels, tactics? Like what was the kind of, I guess that the marketing, or like the kind of go-to-market message to secure funding?
Yeah. So most of our capital to date has come through angel investment, seed and investors, and a crowdfunding activity that we ran. Now, in the earliest days of the startup, you're totally reliant on angel investment, right? So friends, family, people that have worked with you in the past, they will make investments to help you get this business off the ground. And that's where we started with Nobody. But one of the goals was always to sort of expand the amount of people that could be venture investors. And to do that, we had to go through a process almost similar as the level of governance of an IPO. We were going to make essentially a public offering to anyone in the world to invest in our company. And typically in the US, you have to be an accredited investor, which means you have a net worth of over $1 million, or maybe an annual salary of $400,000 a year. So it's pretty limiting, set up by the government, about people who can invest in early stage startups, right? Like the average person can't buy Google when they were like in the garage. They're not allowed. So by going through this governance process that was introduced by the Jobs Act by Barack Obama, if companies were willing to go through a due diligence process, they would then be allowed to be invested in by retail investors. So folks, your average sort of folks on the street. So we did that, and we ran the campaign on Republic, and raised close to $1 million from doing that. And Yeah, but we also got this amazing group of people who loved what we were doing, became nobodies, volunteering ideas, contributing to the company. And yeah, we're sort of only getting started with building that community, but already, you know, it's yielded very talented people in places all over the world who are all sort of willing and excited to work with us in the studio. And, you know, for us, that's amazing.
Yeah, just as you were speaking, then that sort of made me sort of think about, actually, in terms of a recruitment drive, for being this kind of purpose-led, very, you know, community-driven, as you talk about. Like, there's a lot of people that talk about online these days, and there's a lot of research done into Gen Z and whatever, whether you believe in sort of hugely sweeping generalizations about an entire demographic or not. But there is definitely a groundswell of interest and desire and whatever else to kind of come and work for an institution like that is investing its time, energy into helping people get ideas and live and into the world. So it just is were you expecting that? Was that part of the thinking, or did that come as a surprise? It was.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, like, this is sort of, if you will, like recognizing a trend that is emergent, right? Is that young people don't want to work for a big mass. Well, not everybody, but a majority of folks want to work for purpose-led companies where their voice can be heard, where they can contribute and they can bring their creativity and create wealth. And essentially, that's the whole purpose of the studio, is to create a space where people can do that. And yeah, it's been a massive sort of breakthrough and differentiator for us. And we'll continue to do that as much as possible and help people have a voice and build products they want to create.
Yeah, it's quite a nice message for creators out there that perhaps are sort of scaling and looking at what they're doing in terms of using whether they're looking out to secure funding or looking to secure or drive interest and intrigue and people to sort of join their cause, I guess, is a nice sort of thing to think about.
Yeah, well, I would say come to Nobody Studios. You know, like we're actively we're actively looking for folks like that who are trying to build, you know, companies and want to feel like they have a place to do that. And, you know, you can be part of a team. You can have an idea and try and get it into the studio. You can submit it on our website. Just go to nobodystudios.com and you'll see an opportunity there to submit your idea. Or you can join one of the companies that we're building and be a contributor, either product design or engineering leader. Yeah, it's just a fascinating opportunity and experience for everyone.
I will make sure to include those links in the show notes as well. Finally, I wanted to get tap into your expertise, because obviously you've worked with, as we've mentioned, some big companies and worked with a lot of startups. So you've probably learned a thing or two, and I know that you do some advisory and consultancy work. So what is the most common piece of advice that you give to people today? Like, what are the big challenges that you're working through with people, and like what is the thing that you typically find yourself sort of saying almost ad nauseum?
The trick is just to start, you know, like you know, even you think about like a podcast like this, you know, I'm sure you've always wanted to create one, but the hardest part is doing the first one. You know, and you do it and you figure stuff out, and, you know, you're like, oh, maybe I need a different lighting system, or maybe I need a better mic, or here's how I'm going to prepare for the show, or right. And all of these things, like, you can read about them in like on blogs, and I'm sure you did, as I did when I was starting a podcast, but nothing beats the act of doing it. Right. And this sort of goes back to my earliest days of being in City Search or building the mobile games company. You know, like, no one could tell me everything. I had to do it, and I had to like start to experiencing these things and go, more of this, less of that. Here's something new to try. Here's something not to do again. And then it's that process that really, you know, making it a learning improvement process. That's really what separates the great companies from the others, is that people just sort of get stuck into that feedback loop. And then it just sort of drives more and more interest, more engagement, more development in yourself. And for me, that's sort of the biggest thing. So yeah, think big, have big aspirations and bold about what you're trying to achieve. but start small and learn fast what works for you. And I think that's the best advice I've certainly come to learn from myself, and something I would always encourage for others.
Yeah, I remember. So I've gone from 0 to 2 podcast hosts this year. One for Thoughtform, which is this one behind the creator, and one that is my own sort of strategy and creative. And I wish I'd done it one at a time, but I'm in at the deep end, Barry. I'm fully in, and it's absolutely right. Just, you don't know what you don't know, but if you try and learn everything before you start, like you'll never actually get it going. I put doing my podcast off for months because I kept feeling like I wasn't fully ready to do it. Truth is, you never are. And you learn every single time I have these conversations. I learn something new about the show, about doing it, but about other people that I can perhaps take on and implement as well. So that's a good piece of advice. And what characteristics, and I think I know what you're probably going to say, characteristics do the successful people have over others? And is it something that can be taught, or is it something that's kind of innate within people that will sort of elevate them a little bit?
Well, I would always say that any of these skills can be learned. Some people have a natural instinct for them, right? Like there's definitely parts of my personality that like doing things that are new. I see uncertainty as opportunity. I'm always looking for the edge and the boundaries of things, and that's just sort of innate part of my makeup. But the way I've got better is by actually doing a lot of these things and then reflecting and improving and trying. So every skill can be learned. Some people have a natural sort of alignment with some skills that come naturally to them, but everybody can learn it. And I think whether you're as you say, podcasting, building products, thinking about idea testing or scaling companies, they're all skills that you can learn over time. And for me, that's been massive. It's just this thinking big and starting small and learning fast. And I think that's the thing I would suggest to everybody out there is have a big, bold ambition. Don't be afraid of it. Be excited about it, and think about some small steps to start getting you there. And you really might surprise yourself about what happens along the way.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Perfect ending. Thank you very much for your time, Barry.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be on the show. I'm excited to see Behind the Creator. I'm a huge fan of the Thoughtformer team. I literally met them, at a conference maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and we're just in the very early stages of creating their no-code application development platform. And it's just been amazing to watch the team go from strength over the last number of years. And I'm delighted they're part of the Nobody Studios portfolio, and look forward to the company growing and scaling and being amazingly successful in the future.
Thank you very much, Barry. Appreciate it.
Anytime.